Welcome again, deplorables and fellow dirtbags and patriots. Welcome here. So, the big story, of course, is the criminal Biden collapse in Afghanistan, the botched withdrawal. And the point I've made is that there's no way they could not have known what was going to happen. The collapse, the calamity, the disaster that is unfolding, the loss of Afghanistan to the Taliban, the transformation of Afghanistan to basically a terrorist superstate, the position of Afghanistan in Central Asia next to so many critical nations, the debacle of our American citizens, diplomats, and NGOs, and non-combatants that were left behind, perhaps some of the Afghan helpers in the country, the loss of Bagram Air Base, all of these things, and the consequences of that, the utter disaster and embarrassment and humiliation of the country after 20 years now, and trillions of dollars and thousands of lives just totally wasted. And the obvious consequences, and again, you look at Afghanistan and its location in Central Asia, it's next to Pakistan, it's next to Iran. You've got China there, Russia to the north, you've got India to the south, really a critical location. And, as I said before, we should have stayed there and kept it. We had 2,500 soldiers there, a relatively small military imprint, and yet we held that nation. And, we are aware that we have had troops in South Korea and in Japan and in Europe for decades. And, I think it's reasonable. It can be debated whether we need as many or whether we should have any there, I suppose. You can debate that, but to me, I think it's worth it. But when you think of the small number of soldiers that we have in Afghanistan, and yet, how strategic a location that is, and our investment there already, to have done what the criminal Biden and his corrupt Democrat Party did was really quite, it was criminal and devastating consequences, a terrible embarrassment and humiliation to the country. I would describe it as the worst humiliation that we have ever had. The worst foreign policy debacle that we've ever had. And it was a self-inflicted wound. But the point is that there's no way he could not know what was going to happen when he decided to take the troops out first. I mean, just anyone with any minimal knowledge would know, all right, if you are planning to withdraw, you're going to withdraw, in a staged, planned way, so that you get, the diplomats and contractors and other American citizens that are there out of the country first, and then the military would be last. And I would argue that it makes no sense really to have given up Bagram Air Base. It was just an incredible air base, and it was relatively easy to hold that. But anyway, he did that. And we all recognize that clearly it was an absurd criminal thing to do, but beyond that, it was, it's a terrible self-inflicted wound. But the consequences of what he did, the debacle that followed, and not to forget the 13 American soldiers that died in that attack, suicide attack, bombing, who didn't have to die. How quickly they will forget that. But it all had to be deliberate. From the perspective of a Marxist, America-hating, woke president that we have. I mean, if you want to say he's woke, he's obviously in some stage of dementia, but he has thrown in totally with the left. He's not a moderate. He's not lunch bucket Joe at all. He's turned out to be every bit as radical as Bernie Sanders. I am sure Bernie Sanders, who is a socialist, and the rest of the Democrat Party and the squid or the squad, AOC and company, they're all delighted with Biden. There's really no difference between the Democrat Party today and the Biden administration and the Communist Party USA. So the point is that the reason I believe that it was deliberate, that they did this purposely, understood what they were doing, that indeed the whole sequence was deliberate, was because as Democrats and as Marxists, they hate America and their desire is to bring down the country. And what better way to do it than to utterly demoralize the people and to embarrass the nation, to embolden our enemies. Our enemies, of course, are on the move. They sense weakness, and obviously we are quite weak. And so China is sizing up Biden and recognizing an opportunity here, and to pursue their long sought after goal of retaking Taiwan, and maybe Russia will seize the Ukraine. Iran will unleash its terrorist proxies like Hezbollah. They'll help Hamas to attack Israel. And at some point perhaps we'll again see attacks on the United States. So all of that had to be obviously known, and then of course weakening our alliances with NATO, and then in the Pacific with Japan and Korea and Taiwan, and of course in the Middle East with the Sunni Arab states, and of course what I consider to be our greatest ally, which is Israel. So all of this was planned. All of this served the purpose of weakening America and emboldening our enemies, to create crisis and to really demoralize the people. And obviously this is intensely demoralizing. And so again, from the perspective of a woke Marxist, the Taliban, they're good. They like them. They're Muslim, and they have a real hatred for Christianity. They, I guess, like Islam, or at least they like it better than Christianity. I mean, that's the religion of the United States, but they're anti-American. And so from their perspective, to strengthen Islam is good. I guess you can say the Afghanis are dark-skinned, they're sort of brown. That's good, because they hate white people. We know that. That's the essence of wokeness is they hate America and they hate white people. I mean, just listen to what they say. That's what wokeness is all about. That's what being woke is all about. So from the perspective of a woke president, a Marxist, America-hating Democrat president like the criminal Joe Biden, this is a winner to embolden our enemies and to strengthen Afghanistan and the Taliban and whatever terrorist group that now enters the country and uses Afghanistan as a base to launch attacks. That's fine. I mean, we know that they love Iran. Iran is the enemy of the West. Iran is the enemy of Israel. We know that the Democrat Party today, the woke Democrat Party today, favors the enemies of Israel. They favor Hamas, and they favor Hezbollah, and they favor Iran. So in all ways, this would be seen from the perspective of a Marxist Democrat like the criminal Biden to be as a plus. Strengthening the terrorists in Afghanistan for a Democrat, that's fine. To weaken America, to destroy our alliances, to create mistrust between allies. Anything that weakens the United States is seen in a favorable light. Anything that weakens Israel, another country that they despise, and they support the enemies of Israel, that's a positive. So, it's a very dangerous thing when you have a president and a party that is at war with the nation. They are, basically treasonous. They are traitors to America, and they seek to weaken the country and eventually to bring it down. That is the goal of communists around the world. I mean, the great capitalist empire, the great capitalist nation of the United States has been the target of the Marxist left, for a century, decades certainly. And they have taken a major step forward now thanks to Joe Biden. So in all ways, we see that the efforts by the Democrat Party, the criminal Biden, is to undermine the nation, to hurt the nation. And this latest episode in Afghanistan obviously hurts the country and weakens us, weakens our image, and demoralizes the country. And so that, for a Marxist, is a positive thing as they slowly, gradually erode and chip away at the country and eventually bring it to its knees. Obviously, the open borders, the open border with Mexico, bringing in, hundreds of thousands and as many as 2 million illegal aliens into the country, the massive deficit spending, the inflation, and then the rising prices for gasoline and gasoline shortages. All of this is to weaken the United States. And so understanding that there's no way that you could not have foreseen the consequences of that botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, knowing that it is something that was so obvious that anyone would recognize that to have proceeded with that withdrawal that was utterly botched, as we would see it, had to be deliberate. So my point is that we should not underestimate the left and the lengths that they would go to, or that they will go to bring down this country. And so to me, it's clear that they knew what was going to happen, and that was exactly their plan. So, we really have the enemies within the gates. The enemy within. That's the enemy. That's the left. That's the Marxist left. That's the Democrat Party. That's the criminal Joe Biden. Some other interesting questions. We want to not forget the woke generals. This is on their shoulders, but they're woke. They're Marxist leftists, so they're okay with weakening the country, weakening the resolve of the nation. No problem, with General Mark Milley and the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and then all the other Obama generals. These are traitors to the country. They are Marxists, and they're on board with this. Anything that weakens the country for a leftist Marxist Democrat is a good thing. Where are the feminists, by the way? How come, what's going to happen to the women of Afghanistan? How will they be treated? How many of these innocent Afghan women will be tortured and raped and beheaded and killed there? So, where's women's rights? Where, what is the deal with the feminists? How come they're not up in arms? Well, we know that because that's just another facade of Marxism. So they use the whole feminist thing to attack the United States. But I mean, women are equal in America. I mean, they can do whatever they want, and that's good. No problem with that. I mean, where you need feminism is in the Muslim world, but they have no criticism of the Muslim world because they're phonies. They're radical Marxist feminists, and they are just another facade for Marxism. They pretend to be interested in women's rights. Well, where's the women's rights in Afghanistan? Why no protests? Why no objections to what Biden did to the poor innocent women in Afghanistan? Well, because they don't really care about them. They too are part of the Marxist brigade that does whatever they can to bring down the great United States, the great capitalist, free, Republican, Democrat nation of the United States, founded with our incredible Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. These are world historic documents, but don't tell that to a leftist. They despise all of that. Every aspect of America they despise. I'm wondering, what is the GOP response? Why are they not putting together papers of impeachment? I mean, they should be all over this. What are they waiting for? I mean, we know it's not going to pass out of Congress, but they should let him know that he's on. He is on notice. He's going to be impeached. They should begin the process of impeaching this criminal president who's done so much damage to the country. So we're waiting for the GOP response. We're waiting for the feminist response. I'm sure they're appalled at what's going to happen. Not. They could care less because they too are Marxists. Okay, what about Afghan refugees? What's the deal with that? Well, that again is part of why we would have to say that from the Marxist, America-hating, woke Democrat Party, the criminal Biden and his corrupt Democrat Party, his corrupt administration, from the perspective of the left, bringing in hundreds of thousands of Muslim Afghans is a good thing. Anything to dilute, I guess, the white population, I guess, if the truth be said, to dilute the influence of Christianity, and what better way to do that than to bring in 100 to 200,000 Muslim Afghan refugees. They don't share our culture. Obviously, they are not vetted. They should have been, if you wanted to be placed in region and not brought to the United States. But forget about that. I mean, that's perfect from the perspective of the left, to bring in more non-Christians, more non-whites, I guess if we can say, more people from the third world. That's perfect for the Democrat Party. And so again, all of this was deliberate. It was, forget any notion that they were they were fooled by this, they were surprised. They were not surprised. They planned it, and it was deliberate. So we should mention a little bit about, and while we're at it, I mean, look, are we getting Einsteins and Tchaikovskys coming in from Afghanistan? Any Nobel Prize winners? It's important always to remember that the purpose of immigration is to benefit the country. It's not to benefit the immigrant. I mean, we hope they'll benefit, but that's secondary. The first goal is to serve the national interest. What's good for America? What's good for our people? And it hardly helps the country to bring in more people from the third world. We need to bring in people that have skills and educational background or assets that are going to raise the batting average of the country, that will benefit the nation, that will, first of all, speak English, hopefully, and have some skill or educational background that the nation and our economy would benefit from. And so that is reasonable, perhaps, to bring in those kinds of people that can compete in a modern high-tech economy, that will not go on our public systems, and that will, again, contribute to the nation, that will lift up the nation. That's the kind of immigrant that we want. We don't want people that have low skills, no education, and that will wind up being on our public systems, that will burden our schools. That's the opposite of the kind of immigrant that you want. Now, I can assure you that the Afghan refugees or immigrants that are coming, they don't speak English by and large. They probably are not going to assimilate that well into our culture. They lack skills and education that will benefit the nation. If you were that worried about them, then I think it made sense to place them in region and not bring them to the United States. But again, we are under a regime that is anti-American. So from that perspective, it benefits their goals to bring them here. We should mention a little bit about COVID. In many ways, the policy of the medical establishment, the scientific establishment, our government and various state governments and local governments as well, is been really the opposite of what we should have for COVID. This whole thing about pushing the vaccinations. This is, the virus has changed. It's the vaccine is not effective. It wears off in a few months. For some reason, we never speak about natural immunity. Natural immunity is much better than the immunity that you get from the vaccine, because you're having the immune response to the entire virus, not just the spike protein. So it's a more robust and durable immune response. So that's a good thing. That's what you get with natural immunity, because there's more aspects of the virus that our immune system contacts and then forms an immunologic response to. So that again is a better and more robust immunity. And we're finding that the immunity from the vaccine is quite temporary. It's maybe 4 or 5 months and then it wears off. So many of the newly hospitalized COVID patients were people that had been vaccinated. We're seeing numbers of 50, 60%, depending on when it's been looked at or researched. But as you move away from when they received that second shot, and then you're 4 or 5 months beyond, these people are coming down with COVID, and they are being hospitalized. So really we should be pushing natural immunity. What about treatments and therapeutics for COVID? Why is that condemned and censored as it is? We've heard about ivermectin, and for a while we were talking about hydroxychloroquine, but maybe that is not as beneficial. But we have other therapeutics. We're learning about fenofibrate, I believe, is a statin that some studies are showing is beneficial. We've talked before about vitamin D and zinc as being helpful. What about budesonide? Why not share this? Why not, why is it limited to just a precious few doctors that are out there that are offering these other therapeutics? Why the reliance on just the vaccine, which we're seeing is not really effective? And so many patients that are dying unnecessarily because so few doctors are treating them. There are therapeutics that are available now for COVID, and I just went through a few of them. And we should look at that. If you want to say, okay, there's no double-blind randomized control study, well, then go do it. The university should do it. Study ivermectin, study zinc and vitamin D3, and taking an antibiotic like doxycycline and Zithromax. Just go ahead and do it. Do the research. Do the randomized double-blind control study, and let's see if it works. But in point of fact, there are studies that do show ivermectin is beneficial. It's also really a weird thing to be injecting to be vaccinating into a pandemic. I mean, if you see, for example, a patient that comes into your office and has chickenpox, are you going to vaccinate them? I mean, usually you'll just treat them symptomatically. You'll give them something for their fever. If there's a secondary bacterial infection, you'll treat them with an antibiotics. Maybe you'll give them steroids. It just depends. And the doctor will do that. You don't vaccinate them for chickenpox. You treat them. You treat their symptoms. But for some reason, with COVID, we're not allowed to treat. It's just one thing, and that's the vaccination, and then wearing masks and locking down and shutting down. None of which did a thing at all to help. None of which altered in any way the trajectory of the virus. And the other risk of the vaccine, apart from complications from the vaccine, things, problems from the deposition of the immune complexes and the spike protein, which elicits the inflammatory response, and you get thrombotic events as well. Those are the two ways, really, that where you get the serious complications from COVID. It's not so much the virus itself, it's the inflammation from the immune response, and then it is the thrombotic events as well, the clots that form. And wherever the spike protein is deposited, in the lining of the blood vessels, in the heart. We have heard a lot about the problems with myocarditis, especially in young people, young kids that come down with that. And then in the brain and kidneys and throughout the body, you're getting the problems with COVID. It's really the inflammation and the again, blood clots. So and we're seeing that to a certain extent in response to the vaccine as well. But what's wrong with therapeutics here? Why censor that? Why silence that? What's wrong with trying ivermectin, which is such a safe medicine? And the inventor of ivermectin, by the way, won a Nobel Prize for developing ivermectin, which has been used billions of times around the world, has an incredible safety profile, as does, by the way, hydroxychloroquine. We should make that available. What about aspirin? I mean, we mentioned that the two ways that people die or have serious complications from COVID is not the virus itself, but it's the immunologic response. In other words, the inflammation or thrombotic episodes. In other words, blood clots. Aspirin is a blood thinner, very safe. I mean, so many patients are on aspirin. So why not consider that as part of your COVID cocktail of a variety of treatments that you can offer patients? So aspirin and ivermectin, some type of steroid as well. And then, as we mentioned, zinc and vitamin D, and some antibiotics as well, Zithromax or doxycycline or others. And then there's other medicines that we're learning about that are fenofibrate is being found to be helpful, steroids, and so forth. These are very inexpensive medicines. These are generic medicines. And it makes no sense that we're not using some sort of cocktail as therapeutics for COVID. Really, in many ways, it's a form of genocide. It's so immoral, such a disgrace that whenever somebody tries to speak about these other treatments for COVID, they're silenced, they're attacked, they're censored. You have state medical boards that threaten them, and so forth. And every PCP, I mean, try to imagine how different it would be with COVID if we were treating COVID and that every primary care doctor, instead of just a precious few, a fraction of a percent was actually using therapeutics to treat COVID, it'd be a very different picture now. What has gone on really in this whole censorship, this whole attack, this aggressive attack on anyone who questions the received wisdom of just vaccinations and that's it, of lockdowns and shutdowns and masks and that's it. This is in many ways a form of genocide. When you think of the number of people that could have been treated and cured, and again, early treatment, so they get their treatment before they have to be hospitalized, at the first signs of early stage disease, to treat these people. What's wrong with that? This is truly immoral. What the medical establishment, what the science establishment has done. They have failed the country. They have failed the world. You have just an occasional doctor out there, the names that we've discussed before that are out there that are offering treatment for this. And they're, I'm sure, flooded with patients that are desperate. I get calls too, because people hear, my little podcast here, and they know I'm open-minded about treatment, and I do get calls. They ask for help. They're worried about a loved one that, where do they go? They can't get treatment anywhere because no one's treating it. All they do is they admit you, they give you remdesivir, which doesn't work, and they offer you some oxygen. Okay, great. And then they offer you to be intubated and to be on a ventilator. That's late stage. That's not going to have a good outcome by and large. Why not early treatment in the ways that I've mentioned? It's important to know also that when you inject into a pandemic, you get antigenic escape, viral immune escape. You select out for viruses. They mutate and they go through changes that evade the vaccine. And so you may be selecting out for more transmissible, more dangerous viruses through the vaccine. Generally, you don't use vaccines as your first line of treatment in the teeth of a pandemic. Really, everything from the lockdowns and the shutdowns, which did nothing, the masks, which did nothing to alter the trajectory of the virus at all, and then the failure to discuss openly treatment options, therapeutic options for COVID is one of the great sins and failures of the medical and science community, of the medical and science establishment. A disgrace. All right. Well, we're going to move on, and I think we'll close up now. But again, it's important to know every PCP should be out there offering treatment for COVID, and the treatments that I've recommended, from a baby aspirin or a full aspirin, and steroids and inhalers like budesonide, and then the fibrophenate, which is a statin, if I'm saying it correctly, and then ivermectin, used billions of times, very safe. It is truly a sin that this is not being at least discussed and studied, and primary care docs everywhere offering this as an option. All right. So we should say that I think we will finish up now. Maybe I'll talk about my journey to the Bronx at a later time and move on. So it's important that I am all about the New Alliance, where the America First conservative movement, the nationalist, capitalist America First movement that seeks to bring jobs back to America, that seeks to protect the working class in America, that they have jobs that are not being taken by illegal aliens and millions of immigrants that are coming in, that we favor the American worker. We are patriots. We want to secure our border. We want to reduce immigration so that we can employ American citizens, and we want to bring back industry to America, to bring them back to our hollowed out midsection of the country. We want to tax and regulate all these left-wing Marxist woke corporations, tax the hell out of them, and we seek an America first, capitalist, free market, America first, free market economy and free trade, but always America first, American workers and American industry. That's always our priority. So let me refer you to my website, richardmorrismd.com, and there you'll find a lot of interesting photographs of my journeys and in Asia and elsewhere. You can learn about my two books. The first about Matilda's Triumph, about my beloved mother, who raised 5 boys as a single mother in the Bronx. A lot of good stories there. And then my other book, A Surgeon's Odyssey, about my travels as a volunteer surgeon overseas in Thailand, Nepal, India, Bangladesh. A good read. I recommend it to you. And so I will see you then next week, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Thank you very much.